Hey folks, welcome to another episode of ASP.NET Core from Zero to Overkill. In this episode, the final in this sub-series about identity server integration, we'll take a look at the adaptation of the front end to handle all of this authentication logic and knowing about the user and stuff like that. So in the previous episode, we configured the backend for front end to authenticate and authorize the users. In this one, we'll handle the cases where we have authenticated or unauthenticated users, and we'll also support cross-site request forgery tokens. The part for authentication, like it's cookies and stuff like that, so the front end doesn't need to do anything, the browser handles it. So just before starting, the usual plugs. If the videos are being useful, please consider dropping a like, sharing them, so we get more people in here, and leaving feedback so we can improve the videos going forward. With this, let's go. So taking a look at now the front end. So this part, what needs to be done. So what was added? Main parts. If you notice, when we get here, we have no groups because the application knows that the user is not authenticated, and instead appears here the login part. But home and about are still here because the routes were configured as not needing authentication. Then upon login, we do everything for the authentication part. So that part we already saw, because it's mainly that endpoint that we have in the controller on the backend for frontend. In the frontend, the only thing that's needed is to add the return URL, so we can go back to the place where we should. And over here in the code. So let's start. Close. So the first thing is on the router. On the router over here, added this one, the before each. So if when we try to go to a route, for instance, if I try to go to groups, it sees that it's not logged in and redirects back here. So oops, localhost 88. So it's not logged in, so it redirected. This is done by using this, I don't remember the name, what was it called? Route navigation guard, that's it, navigation guard. So we configured the navigation guard somewhere in the router before each, and then we check if for starters, we check if the user is loaded. So there is a getter on the store where we check if the user is already loaded. Let me open the store over here, modules, authentication. So there is the state, which tells if the user is logged in, if the user is loaded. So when we start the application, the front-end application, we must load the user and the username. And then we have a getter that just returns the state. So it's that loaded that we are checking. So over here in the router, so in the first request, in this case the request to the route, the root route, there isn't information loaded, so we dispatch the load info action to the store and we await for it to get back. So it's probably not the greatest because we make the first request to get the single page application static files, and then we make API request to know if the user is loaded or not. So maybe there's a better way to achieve this, but doesn't seem that bad. So we dispatch the action to grab the information. We'll see it in a bit. And after we have the information, we can check if the route that is matched, so to the route to where we are navigating, requires authentication. So over here in the meta, we've put requires authentication, but just in the groups. In the home and the about, there isn't this flag, just in the group. So the groups require the user to be authenticated, the rest of the information is public. So if the route requires authentication and the information, so the auth getters, if the user is not logged in, then we redirect to the API login. And that will start all that process that we saw in the past episode. So it will redirect to the authentication service, which will authenticate, redirect back to the API, the back for front login route, and it will grab the return URL, which is in the location href, so where we are. So if I am, imagine I'm at about and click, or better yet, that's why, because we are doing that, when we click, we do groups, we allow, we get back to groups because it redirected back to where we were. So like this, it redirects. If the user is logged in or the page doesn't require authentication, we just continue. So this was the change that was needed in the route to guard the access to routes that require authentication. So this makes this request to load info, so we go back to the store. I'm going kind of quick because we already discussed these topics regarding the store in previous episodes, but so this is more of the same. I'm dispatching an action, so in the actions we had a load info action, which is asynchronous and makes a request to the auth endpoint, which is a service, to get the authentication info. So let's go to data auth endpoint, which returns a promise of auth info. So this is basically a get request to the info endpoint. Let me check here. Back for front, auth of controller, info. So it makes a request to this endpoint that we saw in the previous episode. Makes a request. If we get this is probably not the best way to handle it, but good enough for now. If we get an error that is a 401, it means the user is not logged in, so we can return null, which means that the user is not logged in. So we go back to the action. If the user is not null, we can set the user. If not, we can set an anonymous user. So we go to the mutations, set user, means it's logged in, it's loaded, and the username is this one. If set anonymous user, we say logged in is false, but is loaded. So when the user is not loaded, we must make a request to load the user. After the user is loaded, even if it's logged out, it's just an anonymous user and we have no username. Okay, so this is the part regarding getting the information. After we have this in the store, so in the state, so after we have in the state the loaded user, the application can resume as always, as usual, with this protection on the routes to not allow an unauthenticated user to see a page. If we didn't put this here and just relied on hiding this, if a user would click here, would succeed. Of course, it would get an error because the user didn't have a cookie. So the backend for frontend would end up rejecting those requests. But like this, we do it without just that. We avoid it altogether. What else can we check? So loading the information. Let me see what changed. So we must check this, the service and the endpoint we saw, the models. No, I created a base service. Okay, let me check. So before seeing the base service and why I created a base service, let's see the app.view. So I added this here. So if the user is logged in, I use this template. If the user is logged in, the router link shows groups. Don't know if there is something to play around with the router, but I did it this way. So user is logged in, groups is shown. Else, login is shown. Probably not the best idea. Login probably should be over here or over here instead of in the middle, but you have by now probably noticed I don't care. I have not been caring that much about this. Oh, and this is also important. This template is shown when the user info is loaded. Before the user info is loaded, we have this spectacular loading that we probably can't see. It's too fast. Or you can see. So while we wait for the user to load, I put this here. It should be a GIF with a loader or something like that, but right now it's just this. So after we have the info is when we can make the decisions regarding the routes that we show. Before that, we can't do it. And now, I think finally, let's just take a look at the base service. So in the data, created a new base service. And what does this do? Yeah, the comment says it all, because I'm not yet completely sure this is the best approach, but not to do this, but to get the access config. So Access, which is the library we're using to make the HTTP requests from the front end, has this nice configuration that allows us to say what's the header that should contain the cross-site request forgery token and the cookie name. So Access does everything for us. So we put the cookie, which is HTTP only equals false. So Access can grab the cookie and in each request add the token to it. So then the backend can validate the requests. So we don't need really to do anything manually, just this. And then on the groups, if we go to group service, on the post and put requests, so add and delete. So on gets no, but on the other requests we are grabbing the Access configuration, which has that. So this receives URL, data, and config. So this third argument is that configuration. So Access does it for us. So let's check a request. We go here. Let's go over here, and now back to groups. If we check the headers, we see that in the request somewhere, request headers, after the cookies, there's the cross-site requests forgery token. So Access did it for us. Grab the cookie, put it in the the header, and now the backend can validate it. And that's it. That part is done. It's not as magic as when we are using Razor Pages that does it for us, but it's not very far. It wasn't really that much amount of work. The backend put the cookie and validates the header. The front end just configures Axios to do it. And I think that's it. Let me check over here in the changes. So I've shown you the app changes, the endpoint service. This info only has a name, configurations, group service changes, auth info. Where is this used? Auth info view model. Okay. Views. Yes, over here. It's used here. So we can access the information. Auth information. User info. User info. I forgot to change its name. I messed up the names. I will have to fix it eventually. No worries. So the changes to the router and the store, which is mostly the same as we saw with the groups, but with this part for the authentication. So I think that's it. In these 5 episodes, we took a look at integrating Identity Server. Maybe, I don't know, I think I touched most of the important subjects, but as always, feel free to ask questions and provide other kind of comments. And yeah, hopefully it was useful for you and you enjoyed it. Hope to see you in the next one. See yous!